Welcome to episode 1 of the DFE Retailer Support Hub webinar series, which we've designed to assist retailers to prepare for and respond to domestic and family violence in the workplace and support employees who may be experiencing domestic and family violence at home. My name is Lindsay, and I'm part of the team at the National Retail Association. As the modern voice of retail in Australia, we represent and support employers in the retail and fast food industries with training and advice on a number of employment-related matters, including supporting and managing workers experiencing domestic and family violence. This webinar has been created to assist employers to better understand domestic and family violence, the effects it can have in the workplace, and what you can do to identify and take steps to support workers experiencing this intimate form of abuse. Before we proceed, it will be helpful to consider the language that we use to describe domestic and family violence, why we use it, and words or phrases to avoid. Domestic violence is the most commonly used and understood phrase, used to describe what is in fact a much more complicated pattern of abusive and controlling behaviour, where one person in an intimate, personal, family or informal carer relationship uses violence or abuse to maintain power and control over the other person. Language matters, and you should be thoughtful about how you discuss this emotionally charged issue. For example, referring to someone with an experience of domestic and family violence as a battered woman minimises the role of the person who is engaged in the violence. In a similar vein, referring to them as an accuser frames the person who engaged in violence as the victim of an accusation. You should also reconsider some of the terms often used when discussing domestic and family violence. For example, people will often use terms like victim, survivor, abuser, or perpetrator. It's worth noting that these terms can be reductive and limiting of people's agency and self-identity. Some people may reject being labelled a victim or the use of the word abuser. Instead, you could consider using first-person language, such as a person who has experienced violence or used or engaged in violence. This type of language aims to emphasise the person rather than defining them by their experience or an act of violence. The phrase is often now used in its expanded form of domestic and family violence to recognise the different circumstances this sort of violence can occur in. You might find it easier to think of DFV as serious abuse or control, not just violence. Financial control, verbal abuse, constant criticism, threats, and controlling behaviours all cause psychological and emotional harm and can have serious consequences. It isn't safe to wait until abuse gets physical before someone seeks help. Domestic and family violence can include emotional abuse, for example, criticism of how someone looks or their parenting skills. Verbal abuse, for example, yelling, shouting, or swearing. Stalking and harassment, for example, constantly following, texting, or phoning someone, cyberstalking or tracking them through social media or global positioning systems. For example, Find My Phone and other location services on smartphones and apps. Domestic and family violence includes financial abuse, for example, withholding money necessary to survive or forcing someone to hand over their money. It includes physical abuse, slapping, hitting, pushing, or strangulation. It includes damaging property to frighten someone, for example, punching holes in walls or breaking furniture. It includes social abuse, for example, not letting someone see their friends or family, isolating a person from people they care about. It can include spiritual abuse, for example, forcing attendance at religious activities or stopping a person from taking part in religious or cultural practices. Domestic and family violence includes sexual abuse, for example, forcing or coercing someone to have sex. It also includes depriving someone of the necessities of life, like food, shelter, and medical care. Domestic and family violence can also be threats, including threats to hurt or kill a person, their children, pets or relatives, friends or work colleagues, threats to damage someone's personal items, to frighten and intimidate them, threats to take away a person's freedom of movement, for example, being locked in a house, threats to stop taking care of someone, For example, someone who is elderly or who lives with a disability may rely on the other person to take care of them. Threats to commit suicide or harm, or threaten harm to intimidate and control a person. Every year, people die from domestic and family violence, even when there has been no history of physical violence. All forms of violence and controlling, obsessive, and jealous behaviours should be taken seriously. Looking at the statistics of the occurrence and impacts of domestic and family violence, we quickly get a picture of a widespread problem affecting people in our workplaces and communities and costing businesses and the economy. The National Retail Association's research shows that for each case of family violence experienced by an employee within the retail industry, the direct costs to employers and business owners was in excess of $1,400 on each occasion. A significant proportion of this direct economic cost can be attributed to staff absenteeism, with some research indicating that family violence can result in individuals being absent from work for up to 18 days each year. We should note that there are some difficulties in obtaining accurate details of the true extent of domestic and family violence because of the private nature of the violence, the nature of the relationships involved, the range of behaviours that are covered, and the fact that domestic and family violence is often not reported. Nevertheless, in 2012, the Australian Bureau of Statistics conducted a survey of a sample of 17,000 men and women aged 18 years and over about their experience of violence. The results of this survey demonstrated not just the prevalence of violence in our communities, but also the way it plays out across gender. The study showed that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 19 men have experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or former partner. When we look at emotional abuse, the rates shoot up to 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men. Overall, women were more likely to experience violence by a known person, with the person using violence most likely to be a previous or current partner. In contrast, men were more likely to experience violence from a stranger, or if they knew the person, they were generally an acquaintance or a neighbour. This survey clearly shows that both women and men experience domestic and family violence at unacceptable rates, with men experiencing emotional abuse at a similar rate to women. However, women are disproportionately the target of domestic and family violence, particularly when it manifests as physical or sexual abuse. In addition to this difference in experience between men and women, statistics have shown that domestic and family violence affects certain communities in different and more pronounced ways in comparison with the general population. In particular, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, the elderly, people with a disability, people who identify as being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender or intersex, and children. The reasons and causes for the greater vulnerability of these groups could take up an entire webinar, but we'll briefly explore some of these causes here to help demonstrate the complexity of the problem and that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. For example, many of these vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, people with a disability and children, are likely to face increased exposure to domestic and family violence because of their dependence and reliance on a partner, family member or carer to provide them with food, medication and other essentials. Here we can see the importance that employment might have to an older person or a person with a disability, because this provides them with a social connection and the potential to be financially independent. Knowledge of and access to support services is also a major feature for many people from these communities across the board, in particular for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. For example, a recent non-English speaking migrant may not have the same language competency to clearly communicate and understand what services may be available to them and how to access those services. Community pressure and the normalisation of violence within communities is also a feature in some communities, such as for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. In some of these communities, domestic and family violence has either been treated as an inevitable part of life, or there is pressure from within the community not to disclose experiences of violence in order to protect the community. Finally, some of the communities are more likely to have experienced emotional trauma and the lack of healthy relationships to model their own behaviour. For example, someone in a gay relationship may have lacked the opportunity to observe and have a healthy gay relationship modelled for them when they were younger, and so they may not understand what is deemed unacceptable behaviour in a relationship. While the Commonwealth and Queensland governments have both done a lot to help address the prevalence of violence in our communities, at its core, this is a community problem. We all have our part to play in addressing and stopping domestic and family violence and helping people who are experiencing or engaging in violence. In particular, employers and the economy can be uniquely affected in ways many people haven't considered. In fact, the annual cost of domestic and family violence to the Australian economy is estimated to be $22 billion. The cost to employers is estimated to be $1.9 billion, and the impact on retailers is $100 million annually. In 2016, KPMG prepared a report for the Commonwealth Government that set out some of these costs, both financial and non-financial. Besides the more obvious impact on the health and well-being of workers, one of the major other areas of cost for employers were productivity-related costs. These costs for employers can include the cost of workers being absent from their work because of the impact to their health from violence they're experiencing, the psychological effects of domestic and family violence resulting in reduced productivity when a worker is at work, the administrative costs and losses as a result of valued workers' employment ending due to resignation forced by partners or their circumstances, or termination because of conduct and performance issues caused by the effects on a worker who is experiencing or engaging in domestic and family violence. Not to mention, manifestations of domestic and family violence have the potential to spill over into the workplace, with 95% of women with partners who stalk them having experienced harassment at their place of work, with some partners actively engaging in violence, trying to have their partners fired to increase the worker's dependence on their partner. As employers have a duty of care to ensure the health and safety of their workers and provide and maintain a work environment without risks to their health and safety, employers should ensure they consider and take steps to ensure the safety of workers who may be experiencing domestic and family violence. It is a workplace health and safety risk. It reduces productivity and performance. It increases costs on business. It has legal ramifications, and we can do better. Finally, employment also has a positive impact on domestic violence. Having a job is a key pathway to permit and encourage a person experiencing violence from their partners to leave the relationship. As an employer, I assure you understand what domestic and family violence is, how it may manifest, and the signs it may be affecting one of your staff. It's important to unpack what domestic and family violence can look like so employers and workers can identify when it's happening to themselves or to others and to take the first steps to stop the violence. As mentioned at the start of this webinar, domestic and family violence does not just consist of a discrete list of actions. It's a pattern of behaviour by one person in a close personal relationship with another that is physically, sexually, or emotionally abusive in order to instill fear and maintain power and control over the other person. There are certain behaviours that commonly occur as part of this pattern of behaviour. Some are more obvious, like physical violence or emotional abuse, such as stalking, which I mentioned earlier. Certain behaviours are even specifically included in the legal definition of domestic violence. For example, in Queensland Domestic and Family Violence Protection Act, domestic violence behaviours include damaging a person's property or threatening to do so, threatening to commit suicide or self-harm so as to torment, intimidate or frighten a person to whom the behaviour is directed, and unauthorised surveillance of a person, including monitoring someone else's texts, emails or social media and tracking them with GPS like Find My Friends on many smartphones. Some manifestations of domestic and family violence may even be distinct to certain vulnerable groups. For example, threatening to disclose someone's sexuality or transgender status to friends or their colleagues, or withholding vital medication to someone with a disability. This form of abuse is particularly relevant to employers because you'll generally be a worker's primary source of income, and economic abuse by a partner or family member may in fact deprive them of it or even lead to attempts to have your worker resign or be dismissed. Other examples of behaviours that may indicate someone is experiencing family and domestic violence include not presenting for work and being uncontactable, for example, being held against their will at home, taking excessive sick leave, seeming afraid of their partner or someone close to them, needing to get the consent of their partner before any work-related changes occur, for example, changes to rosters, hiding bruises, for example, by wearing long sleeves in summer or giving unlikely explanations for injuries, having little or no say about how money is spent, becoming isolated from friends or family, becoming depressed, unusually quiet, showing signs of neglect if they're still a child, an older person, or if they have a disability, having a partner who frequently checks up on them at work, either in person or by phone or other electronic means, someone displaying reluctance to leave children with their partner. An employee may be in greater danger if there's a history of domestic and family violence in their home, if violence has escalated within the relationship, if their partner is stalking or monitoring their movements, if they separate or plan to separate from their partner, if they start a new relationship or their former partner believes that they have, if there is conflict within the broader family, if there are issues about child custody or access to children, if your employee is pregnant, if there is financial hardship or unemployment, if their partner has a history of physical violence, mental illness, or access to weapons. While it may not feel like it, employers can act and make changes to their workplace that can make a real difference to the lives of people experiencing domestic and family violence. However, there are barriers to overcome in order to take this action. One of the biggest barriers to ending domestic and family violence is the reluctance of people experiencing domestic and family violence to act themselves. In the Australian Bureau of Statistics survey discussed earlier, an estimated 80% of women and 95% of men never contact the police about violence by their current partner. Of those who experienced violence from their current partner, 54% of men and 26% of women had never told anyone. With such high rates of non-disclosure, employers can play a vital role in educating workers on how domestic and family violence manifests, encourage workers to seek support, and give them access to support services, as studies have shown that workers experiencing domestic and family violence who disclosed in the workplace did so to co-workers at a rate of 64%, followed by immediate supervisors at 29% and non-immediate supervisors and others both at 21%. One of the aims of the DFE Retailer Support Hub is to help employers recognise when DFE may be happening in the lives of one of their staff and feel empowered to support that employee when it's safe to do so. In webinar 2, we'll be providing helpful tips on how to raise the topic with an employee and the importance of confidentiality and sensitivity. One of the things an employer can do from the outset is to foster a workplace culture that shows workers that domestic and family violence hurts our communities and can also impact people in the workplace, that the health and safety of workers is important, and that domestic and family violence puts that safety at risk, that the workplace will respond to any disclosures of domestic and family violence in a non-judgmental and supportive way, and support these workers to deal with domestic and family violence that they may be experiencing at home. Fostering an effective workplace culture will also demonstrate to workers that there are support services that they can access if they need help. There are also a few steps that employers can take to create this kind of culture. It starts with everyday, ordinary actions, like modelling and encouraging respectful communication and behaviour. Everyone should be encouraged to respectfully challenge inappropriate behaviours, including sexist language and jokes. Sexist language and jokes are often easily dismissed as casual banter, but this behaviour can foster attitudes that allow for domestic and family violence to become normalised and discourages people from disclosing if domestic and family violence is occurring. Employers should also introduce a workplace policy for domestic and family violence, outlining the workplace's position on domestic and family violence and what processes will be followed with respect to it. Check out our resources kit on the DFV Retailer Support Hub webpage for an example DFV policy. In this and the following webinars, we will discuss in greater detail what should be included, but we recommend that your policy do the following as a minimum. It should include an introduction reaffirming the employer's commitment to their workers' health, safety and well-being, and recognise the negative impact that domestic and family violence has on workers and the community. It should confirm that any disclosure of domestic and family violence will be treated confidentially and sensitively and only be disclosed with others who have a genuine need to know. Any policy should include an outline of what types of leave workers may access if they are experiencing or engaging in domestic and family violence, or even supporting someone who is, and the notice and evidence required. Your policy should include details of what measures the workplace can take to support workers experiencing domestic and family violence, such as flexible working arrangements or changes to their contact details. Your policy should also include details of a nominated contact person in the workplace who understands DFV and how it manifests, who exercises discretion and privacy, and who has access to appropriate resources and referrals to support services. Finally, your policy should give a commitment to undertaking appropriate safety measures and planning before and in response to domestic and family violence that is disclosed, and include contact details for support services that your workers can access if they need help. Once this policy is in place, make sure that you regularly review its effectiveness and make changes as needed. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to managing domestic and family violence, and strategies that work in one workplace may not work elsewhere. Importantly, once you have this policy in place, you need to make sure your employees know about it. You should conduct training and education with employees to ensure that they understand the policy. This training is also a great opportunity to provide them with a deeper understanding of domestic and family violence and how it manifests both at home, in private spaces, and also in the workplace. Importantly, you can discuss what you can all do in practice to support someone experiencing or engaging in domestic and family violence in the workplace, which we'll be discussing in greater detail in a future webinar. Thank you for joining us today to begin what is a very important discussion. In webinar 2, we'll discuss how to look for signs of domestic and family violence in the workplace and how to take the first steps to support your workers. If any of the discussions we've had today have raised questions about your obligations as an employer, please call the team at the National Retail Association on 1800 445 522. Finally, if you or someone you know may be experiencing domestic and family violence, please seek support by calling the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service on 1800-RESPECT or DV Connect on 1800-811-811 for women and 1800-600-636 for men.